In a busy city where life moved fast and people barely had time to catch their breath, there lived a young woman with big dreams. She was in her early 20s, full of energy, and had a spark in her eyes that told everyone she was going places. Her dream? To become an artist. Not just any artist, but someone whose work could inspire others and make them see the world differently. Every day after finishing her shift at a small cafe downtown, she would walk home thinking about colors, shapes, and how she could bring her ideas to life on canvas. One summer evening, as the sun began to set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, she was heading back from work like usual. The streets were alive with sounds, cars honking, kids laughing, music playing somewhere far away, but something felt different that night. As she turned onto her street, she noticed two police officers standing near the corner. They looked tense, talking loudly to each other while glancing around. A man stood nearby, his hands raised, answering their questions. At first, she didn't think much of it. Police presence wasn't uncommon in her neighborhood. It happened often enough that most people learned to keep their heads down and stay out of trouble. But then she saw one of the officers turn toward her. His gaze locked onto hers, and suddenly, everything changed. "Hey, you!" he called out sharply, pointing at her. Her heart skipped a beat. Me? She thought, confused. What could they possibly want with her? She hadn't done anything wrong. Still, she stopped walking and looked at them, waiting for an explanation. But no explanation came. Instead, the officer started moving quickly in her direction. Before she could even open her mouth to ask what was going on, he pulled out a small canister. In the blink-spawns of an eye, he sprayed something directly into her face. Pain exploded across her skin. Her eyes burned so badly she couldn't keep them open. Tears streamed uncontrollably down her cheeks and her throat felt like it was on fire. Gasping for air, she stumbled backward, clutching her face. "What? Why are you doing this?" She managed to choke out between sobs. Her voice trembled, not just from the physical pain, but also from sheer panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. People weren't attacked by police without reason, or at least that's what she always believed. The second officer seemed unsure of what to do. He hesitated, looking between his partner and the young woman now crumpled on the ground. Some bystanders who had been watching stepped closer, shouting angrily. "What did she do? Why are you hurting her?" one person demanded. Another tried to help her sit up, patting her shoulder gently and telling her to breathe slowly. Through the haze of agony, all she could think was, why is this happening? She hadn't stolen anything. She hadn't hurt anyone. She was just trying to get home after a long day of work. Yet here she was, lying on the hard pavement, completely helpless. As the crowd grew louder, the aggressive officer finally spoke. "Stop resisting!" he barked, grabbing her arms roughly. Resisting? She wasn't resisting. She couldn't even stand up straight, let alone fight back. Despite her protests, he snapped handcuffs around her wrists and dragged her to a patrol car parked nearby. With little care, he shoved her inside and slammed the door shut. Sitting alone in the cold, cramped back seat, her mind raced. Who were these officers? What crime did they think she committed? And more importantly, how could she prove she was innocent? Her chest tightened with fear and confusion. She had never been in trouble with the law before. This felt surreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the car sat parked, unmoving. Outside, voices continued yelling, demanding answers. Inside, she struggled to calm herself. Her face still stung fiercely, and every breath felt labored. She tried wiping her tears away, but her hands were cuffed behind her back, making even that simple act impossible. Finally, the car door opened again. One of the officers leaned in, his expression unreadable. "We're taking you to the station," he said flatly before slamming the door once more. As the engine roared to life and the vehicle began moving, she stared out the window, watching the familiar streets blur past. For the first time in her life, she felt truly scared, not just for herself, but for what might come next. Little did she know, this incident would set off a chain reaction that would affect not only her life but also the lives of countless others. But right now, All she wanted was to understand why this had happened, and whether justice would ever be served. The ride to the police station felt endless. Every bump in the road sent a jolt through her body, and the cold metal of the handcuffs dug into her wrists. She kept replaying the events in her mind, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why had they targeted her? What had she done to deserve this? The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. But beneath the anger was fear. Fear of what might happen next. Fear that no one would believe her side of the story. When they finally arrived at the station, she was led inside through a side entrance, away from prying eyes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she was taken to a small, windowless room. It smelled faintly of stale coffee and cleaning products. They pushed her into a chair, still cuffed, and left her there alone. For a while, nothing happened. No one came in to explain why she was brought here or what they wanted from her. All she could do was sit and wait, her heart pounding with every passing second. Time moved strangely in that room. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe it only felt that way because of how tense she was. Her face still burned, though the pain had dulled slightly. Occasionally she heard muffled voices outside the door, but no one entered. She tried not to let her mind spiral, but it was hard not to imagine the worst-case scenarios. Would they keep her locked up all night? Would anyone even know where she was? Finally, after what seemed like forever, the door opened. A man in plain clothes walked in, holding a clipboard. He looked tired, his tie loosened around his neck. "I'm Detective Harris," he said, sitting down across from her. His tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't exactly friendly either. "Can you tell me where you were earlier today?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What does that have to do with anything?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Why did those officers attack me? I didn't do anything." Harris leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "Look, I understand you're upset," he said slowly, "but we need to get some facts straight. There's been a robbery reported in your neighborhood. Witnesses mentioned seeing someone matching your description near the scene." Her mouth dropped open. "That's impossible. I've been working all day. You can check with my manager, if you don't believe me." She paused, shaking her head. "This is insane. I didn't steal anything. I was just walking home when those cops jumped me for no reason." Detective Harris scribbled something on his clipboard, then sighed. "Okay, calm down. Let's start from the beginning. Can you walk me through your day?" Reluctantly, she began recounting her routine, waking up early, heading to work, serving customers at the cafe, and finally leaving at the end of her shift. As she spoke, Harris listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking follow-up questions. Despite his calm demeanor, she couldn't shake the feeling that none of this should be happening. She hadn't committed a crime. Why was she being treated like a suspect? Just as she finished explaining her day, Harris's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and stood abruptly. "Hold on a moment," he muttered before stepping out of the room. Left alone again, she slumped in her chair, exhausted and frustrated. How much longer was this going to go on? Would anyone actually listen to her? A few minutes later, the door opened again, but this time it wasn't Detective Harris who walked in. It was another man, older and wearing a formal uniform. His badge gleamed under the harsh lighting. "I'm Chief Reynolds," he said, his voice firm but measured. "We need to talk." Something about his presence made her uneasy. Was he here to intimidate her further? To pressure her into confessing to something she didn't do? But instead of launching into accusations, Chief Reynolds took a deep breath and looked her directly in the eye. "First, let me apologize for what happened tonight," he said. "It shouldn't have gone down the way it did." Apologize? That wasn't what she expected. She stared at him, unsure how to respond. Before she could say anything, he continued. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. We've identified the actual suspect involved in the robbery, and it's clear you aren't connected to the case." Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. "So why did your officers assault me?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea what that felt like?" Do you know how scared I was? Chief Reynolds nodded solemnly. You're absolutely right. What happened was unacceptable. Those officers will be held accountable, I promise you that. But there's something else you need to know. He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. Your father used to serve in this department. He was a respected officer, known for his integrity and dedication. When we realized who you were, it became clear that this situation needed immediate attention. Her father? She hadn't mentioned him once during the interrogation. How did they figure that out? And why did it matter so much? Part of her wanted to argue, to point out that her innocence shouldn't depend on who her family was, but she was too drained to fight anymore. All she wanted was to go home. I'll personally oversee the investigation into tonight's events, Chief Reynolds assured her. And I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. In the meantime, you're free to leave. Free to leave? Just like that? After everything she'd been through, the sudden dismissal felt surreal. They uncuffed her and escorted her out of the station, where a car was waiting to take her home. As she climbed into the back seat, she couldn't help but wonder, was justice really going to be served? Or was this just damage control because of her father's reputation? The drive home gave her time to reflect. Her face still stung, and her wrists bore red marks from the handcuffs. Physically, she was battered, but emotionally, she was even worse. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone else who might find themselves in a similar situation without the privilege of having a well-known parent to protect them. When she finally stepped through her front door, her mother rushed to hug her tightly. Tears filled both their eyes as they held each other. I was so worried, her mom whispered. They wouldn't tell me where you were. As the adrenaline faded and reality set in, exhaustion hit her like a wave. She collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the wall. The night's events replayed in her mind over and over again. She knew she couldn't just brush this off. Something inside her had shifted. She couldn't stay silent, not after what she'd been through. But for now, all she could do was rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, and perhaps even a chance to fight back against the system that had failed her. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to close her eyes and drift into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the cracks in her bedroom curtains, but she didn't feel its warmth. Her body was heavy with fatigue, and her mind buzzed with thoughts that refused to quiet down. She lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the night before. It wasn't just the physical pain that lingered. The burning sensation on her face had faded, though her skin still felt raw. But the emotional weight of what had happened pressed down on her like a ton of bricks. Her mother knocked softly on the door before peeking inside. Are you awake? She asked gently. When her daughter nodded, she came in carrying a tray with tea and toast. I thought you might need something to eat. She forced a weak smile. Thanks, Mom. But as she reached for the cup, her hands trembled slightly. She hated showing vulnerability, especially to her mom, who already looked worried enough. Still, there was no hiding how shaken she was. Do you want to talk about it? Her mother asked after a moment of silence. For a second, she considered, brushing it off, saying she was fine, pretending everything would blow over. But the words caught in her throat. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? Instead, she sighed and set the cup down. I don't even know where to start, she admitted. It's like, 1 minute, I'm walking home, minding my own business, and the next, I'm being attacked by cops. And now everyone's acting like it's okay because they figured out Dad used to work there. Her mother sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her arm. It's not okay, she said firmly. What happened to you was wrong, no matter who your father is or isn't. You deserve answers, and so does everyone else who might go through the same thing. That last part stuck with her. It wasn't just about her anymore. If this could happen to her, a young woman with no record, whose family had ties to law enforcement, what about others? What about people without connections, without someone to step in and demand accountability? The thought made her stomach churn. Later that afternoon, as she scrolled through social media on her phone, She realized the story had spread far beyond her control. Videos of the incident had surfaced online, recorded by bystanders who witnessed the attack. In grainy footage, she saw herself crumple to the ground as the officer sprayed her without warning. Comments flooded the posts, ranging from outrage to disbelief. Some people defended the police, claiming they were just doing their job, while others demanded justice for the victim. One comment caught her eye. "If this can happen to her, it can happen to anyone." The words hit hard. They echoed her mother's earlier sentiment, reminding her that this wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a bigger problem. A system that allowed such things to happen needed to be challenged. But how? She wasn't an activist or a public speaker. She was just a regular person trying to live her life. Yet here she was, thrust into the spotlight against her will. By evening, reporters began calling. At first, it was just local news outlets, but soon national journalists joined in. Her phone buzzed nonstop with notifications. Messages poured in from friends, acquaintances, and even strangers offering support or asking for interviews. Each call added pressure, making her feel like she was drowning in expectations she hadn't asked for. Her father finally arrived, home late that night. He'd been out of town when the incident occurred and had only learned about it through frantic messages from his wife. When he walked in, his usual calm demeanor was replaced with anger. Not at her, but at the situation itself. "This shouldn't have happened," he said, pacing the living room. "No one should treat another human being like that, especially not officers sworn to protect them." She watched him closely, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Growing up, she'd always admired his sense of fairness and dedication to helping others. Now, seeing him react so strongly, she felt a mix of pride and frustration. Pride because he cared deeply about justice. Frustration because she didn't want special treatment based on his reputation. She wanted accountability, not favors. "I don't know what to do," she admitted quietly. "Everyone keeps saying I should speak out, but I'm scared. What if nothing changes? Or worse, what if it makes things worse?" Her father stopped pacing and knelt beside her chair. "You don't have to decide right now," he said. "But remember this. Your voice matters. If you choose to use it, you could help prevent this from happening to someone else. That's powerful. Powerful." The word stuck with her long after he left the room. Could she really make a difference? Was it worth stepping into the chaos and risking more attention? These questions swirled in her mind as she tried to sleep, but rest eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the attack, the officer's cold expression, the spray hitting her face, the crowd yelling around her. The following day, protests erupted across the city. People gathered outside the police station holding signs that read, "Justice for her," and "Accountability now." Chants filled the air, echoing through the streets. Friends texted her photos and videos urging her to join. Others encouraged her to stay safe and avoid putting herself in harm's way again. Both sides had valid points, leaving her torn between staying silent and standing up. As the protests grew louder, so did the calls for reform within the police department. Community leaders held meetings to discuss systemic issues, demanding transparency and better training for officers. Meanwhile, leaked body cam footage from the night of the incident confirmed what many suspected. The attack had been completely unprovoked. There was no evidence that she posed any threat to the officers. The video reignited public outrage, fueling debates about racial profiling and police brutality. Despite the mounting pressure, she stayed indoors, watching it all unfold from afar. Part of her wanted to march alongside the protesters, to show solidarity and let them know she supported their cause. Another part of her hesitated, unsure if she was ready to face the world again. The thought of cameras flashing in her face, reporters shouting questions, and strangers scrutinizing her every move made her anxious. Her art supplies sat untouched in the corner of her room, collecting dust. Painting had always been her escape, her way of processing emotions too big to put into words. But lately, even creativity felt out of reach. How could she create beauty when everything around her felt broken, One evening, unable to ignore the pull any longer, she picked up a brush and stared at a blank canvas. Slowly, tentatively, she began to paint. Strokes of red and orange spilled across the surface, representing the firestorm of anger and pain she'd experienced. Blues and purples followed, symbolizing sadness and fear. As she worked, tears slipped down her cheeks, mixing with the colors on the palette. When she stepped back hours later, she saw something unexpected: hope. Amidst the chaos of colors, she'd unconsciously painted rays of light breaking through the darkness. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. For the first time since the incident, she felt a flicker of clarity. Maybe speaking out wouldn't fix everything overnight. Maybe it wouldn't bring immediate justice. But staying silent wouldn't help either. With renewed determination, she decided it was time to take the first step toward reclaiming her voice, and perhaps inspiring others to do the same. The decision to speak out didn't come easily. It wasn't just about facing the cameras or addressing a crowd. It was about stepping into a role she never asked for. For days, she wrestled with doubt. What if people judged her? What if they dismissed her story because of who her father was? Or worse, what if speaking up made things worse instead of better? These thoughts haunted her, keeping her awake at night. But then she remembered the painting. The colors on the canvas had shown her something important. Even in the darkest moments, there's always a glimmer of hope. And maybe, just maybe, sharing her truth could be that light for someone else. So, after much thought, and many late-night conversations with her parents, she decided it was time. She couldn't stay silent anymore. Her first step was small but meaningful. She posted a photo of her painting online, along with a short caption. "This is how I feel right now. Broken, angry, and scared, but also hopeful. If my story can help spark change, then I won't stay quiet." Within minutes, the post blew up. Comments poured in from strangers thanking her for being brave enough to share her experience. Some shared their own stories of mistreatment by law enforcement, while others offered words of encouragement. Reading through them, she realized she wasn't alone. There were countless others who had faced similar injustices, or feared they might. One day, encouraged by the response, she decided to take things further. With the help of a local community organizer, she planned a press conference. The idea terrified her. Standing in front of reporters and cameras wasn't exactly her comfort zone, but she knew it was necessary. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who felt powerless. On the morning of the press conference, nerves got the best of her. She barely ate breakfast, her stomach tied in knots. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her clothes and practiced what she wanted to say. "You've got this," her mom whispered, squeezing her shoulder before they left the house. Those three words stayed with her as they drove to the park where the event was being held. When they arrived, she was overwhelmed by the turnout. Dozens of people had gathered, holding signs and cheering when she stepped onto the makeshift stage. Reporters jostled for position, microphones pointed in her direction. Cameras flashed like strobe lights, momentarily blinding her. For a moment, she froze, unsure if she could go through with it. But then she saw her dad standing off to the side, his expression calm yet proud. Beside him, her mom gave her an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, she stepped up to the microphone. Silence fell over the crowd as all eyes turned to her. Her voice shook at first, but she forced herself to keep going. "I never imagined I'd be here today," she began, gripping the sides of the podium for support. "A few nights ago, I was walking home from work, thinking about my day when two police officers stopped me without explanation. One of them sprayed me in the face with pepper spray, for no reason. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. All I could think was, why is this happening?" Pausing to steady herself, she looked out at the sea of faces. Some nodded in understanding while others wiped tears from their eyes. "At first, I thought this was just about me," she continued. "But then I realized it's bigger than that. It's about every person who's been treated unfairly because of how they look, where they live, or who they are. It's about a system that needs to change. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, fueled by both anger and determination. I'm not here to attack anyone personally. I'm here because we need accountability. We need training that teaches officers to de-escalate situations instead of escalating them. We need transparency so people can trust those who are supposed to protect them. Most importantly, we need justice, not just for me, but for everyone. The crowd erupted in applause, chants of justice filling the air. Reporters shouted questions, but she held up a hand to silence them. This isn't the end, she said firmly. It's just the beginning. Together we can make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. After the press conference, the momentum only grew. News outlets picked up her story, amplifying her message across the country. People started organizing rallies in other cities inspired by her courage. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #DieCheered Accountability Matters and #Change the System. Even celebrities and activists joined the conversation, lending their voices to the cause. Back home, life became a whirlwind. Interview requests flooded in, and she found herself appearing on talk shows and podcasts. At first, she struggled to balance her newfound visibility with her desire for normalcy. Friends joked that she was becoming famous, but fame wasn't what she wanted. She simply wanted justice, and for people to understand the importance of speaking out. One evening, after taping an interview, she returned home exhausted. Her dad greeted her at the door, concern etched on his face. "How are you holding up?" he asked. She shrugged, sinking onto the couch. "I don't know," she admitted. "Sometimes it feels like too much. Like maybe I'm not cut out for this." Her dad sat beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her knee. "Listen to me," he said softly. "You're doing something incredible. Not everyone has the strength to stand up like you have. You're making a difference even if you can't see it yet." His words brought tears to her eyes. She leaned into him, grateful for his support. "Thanks, Dad," she murmured. "I needed to hear that." As the weeks went on, she began channeling her energy into creative ways to keep the movement alive. She collaborated with local artists to create murals around the city, each one depicting themes of resilience and unity. She partnered with advocacy groups to host workshops on civic engagement, teaching people how to hold officials accountable. Slowly but surely, she found her rhythm, learning to navigate the challenges of activism while staying true to herself. Despite the progress, setbacks reminded her that change wouldn't come overnight. The officer responsible for attacking her claimed he'd acted based on mistaken identity, insisting he'd done nothing wrong. Internal investigations dragged on, frustrating both her and the community. Critics accused her of seeking attention, dismissing her efforts as performative. But she refused to let negativity derail her mission. One particularly tough day, she visited the park where the protests had started. Sitting on a bench, she watched kids play and families laugh together. In that moment, surrounded by everyday life, she reminded herself why she was fighting. It wasn't for headlines or applause. It was for these people, for the chance to build a world where everyone felt safe and valued. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, she smiled faintly. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was ready. She had already proven that one person's voice could ignite a fire, and sometimes that was all it took to start a revolution. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Every day brought new challenges, new opportunities, and new reasons to question whether she was doing the right thing. While some people praised her courage, others criticized her every move. Online trolls left nasty comments on her social media posts, calling her names and accusing her of exaggerating what had happened. Some even suggested she deserved it because of where she lived or how she looked. Reading those words hurt more than she expected, but she refused to let them break her. Her mom often reminded her, "Haters will always exist. Focus on the people who truly matter, the ones standing beside you." Those words became her anchor whenever negativity threatened to pull her under, and there were plenty of people standing beside her. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers reached out with messages of support. Some sent care packages filled with art supplies, knowing how much painting meant to her. Others offered to help organize events or spread awareness about the cause. Their kindness kept her going when self-doubt crept in. One afternoon, she received an invitation to speak at a town hall meeting hosted by local leaders. The purpose of the event was to discuss police reform and community relations. At first, she hesitated. Public speaking still made her nervous, especially since these meetings often turned heated. But something about the invitation felt important, like another step toward creating real change. After talking it over with her family, she agreed to attend. On the day of the meeting, the room buzzed with energy. Rows of chairs were packed with residents eager to voice their opinions. Officers from the police department sat stiffly at the front, their expressions unreadable. She recognized a few faces, including Chief Reynolds, who gave her a slight nod as she took her seat near the podium. Her heart raced as she waited for her turn to speak. When her name was called, she stood up slowly, clutching her notes tightly. Walking to the microphone, she scanned the crowd. Some faces were friendly, nodding encouragingly, while others stared back coldly. Taking a deep breath, she began. "I'm here today not just as someone who experienced injustice firsthand, but as someone who believes we can do better," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern, a symptom of bigger issues within our system." She went on to share specific ideas for reform: mandatory de-escalation training, body cameras for all officers, and independent oversight committees to investigate misconduct. Each suggestion was met with murmurs of agreement from parts of the audience, though a few officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When she finished speaking, applause broke out, drowning out any opposing voices. Afterward, several attendees approached her to thank her for her honesty. One elderly woman hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You give us hope," she whispered. Moments like that reminded her why she kept pushing forward, even when it felt exhausting. But not everyone was supportive. During the open discussion portion of the meeting, tensions flared. A man in the back row stood up, his face red with anger. "We don't need reforms," he shouted. "We need tougher policing. Criminals run wild because you people keep tying cops' hands." His words sparked a heated debate, with arguments flying back and forth across the room. She listened quietly, letting others respond, but the hostility weighed heavily on her. Later that night, as she replayed the meeting in her mind, she realized something important. Progress wouldn't come without resistance. Change rarely did. The fact that people were arguing passionately, loudly, meant they cared. And caring, even if it looked messy, was a start. Determined to channel her frustration into action, she threw herself into organizing more events. With the help of local activists, she planned a Know Your Rights workshop aimed at educating residents about what to do during police encounters. Flyers were distributed throughout the neighborhood, and volunteers set up tables in parks and community centers to spread the word. On the day of the workshop, dozens of people showed up eager to learn. As she stood in front of the group explaining legal rights and offering practical advice, she felt a sense of empowerment she hadn't experienced before. This wasn't just about reacting to what had happened to her. It was about equipping others with tools to protect themselves. Seeing the determination in their eyes made her believe, for the first time, that maybe things could get better. Still, the fight wasn't easy. Some days it felt like taking 2 steps forward only to be pushed 3 steps back. Rumors swirled about internal investigations stalling within the police department. Whispers hinted at resistance from higher-ups unwilling to implement meaningful changes. Even Chief Reynolds, who had initially seemed supportive, grew quieter over time, avoiding direct contact with her. Frustrated but undeterred, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Using her growing platform, she launched an online petition demanding accountability for the officer who had attacked her. Within days, thousands of signatures poured in from across the country. Supporters shared the petition widely, amplifying its reach. Local news outlets picked up the story again, reigniting public interest in the case. The renewed attention put pressure on the police department to act. Finally, after months of waiting, an announcement came. The officer involved would face disciplinary action, including suspension and mandatory retraining. While the outcome wasn't everything she'd hoped for, criminal charges hadn't been filed. It was a small victory nonetheless. Celebrating the win with friends and family, she allowed herself a moment of relief. Her mom baked her favorite cake, and her dad raised a toast saying, "To justice and to never giving up." As laughter filled the room, she felt a rare sense of peace. For once, she wasn't thinking about the next battle or worrying about what might go wrong. She simply enjoyed being surrounded by love and support. Yet deep down she knew the fight wasn't over. Holding one officer accountable was just the beginning. Real change required addressing deeper systemic issues that couldn't be solved overnight. But as she blew out the candles on her cake, she reminded herself of something important. Progress didn't have to happen all at once. Small victories mattered too, and each step forward brought her closer to the world she dreamed of. A world where everyone felt safe, respected, and valued. The small victory brought a sense of relief, but it also left her feeling restless. She knew that punishing one officer wasn't enough to fix the bigger problems in the system. It was like putting a bandage on a deep wound. It might stop the bleeding temporarily, but it wouldn't heal the injury. That realization gnawed at her, pushing her to keep going. The fight for justice wasn't just about her anymore. It had become something much larger. One morning, as she sipped coffee and scrolled through messages online, she came across a comment that stopped her cold. A young woman had written, "I saw what happened to you and it made me realize I'm not alone. Last year I was stopped by police for no reason too. I thought it was my fault, but now I see it's part of a pattern." Reading those words hit her hard. This stranger's story could have been hers, or anyone else's. It was proof that the problem ran deeper than individual actions. It was systemic. That same day, she decided to start collecting stories from others who had faced similar experiences. She created a simple form on social media where people could share their accounts anonymously if they chose. Within hours, responses began pouring in. Some were brief, a single sentence describing an unfair traffic stop or a rude remark from an officer. Others were long, detailed essays recounting traumatic encounters with law enforcement. Each story added weight to the growing pile of evidence showing how widespread these issues were. As she read through them, tears often blurred her vision. There was anger in the stories, yes, but there was also fear. Fear of stepping outside. Fear of being profiled. Fear of never being believed. These weren't just complaints, they were cries for help. They reminded her why she couldn't afford to slow down now. With the permission of those who shared, she started compiling the stories into a project she called Voices Unheard. Her goal was to create a public platform where these experiences could be seen and acknowledged. She reached out to local artists, photographers, and writers, asking if they'd collaborate on bringing the project to life. Together, they worked tirelessly, turning raw emotions into art, murals depicting strength and resilience, poems capturing pain and hope, photographs showing faces behind the stories. The launch of Voices Unheard took place at a community center, downtown. On the night of the event, the space buzzed with energy. People wandered between displays, reading stories pinned to walls and listening to recorded testimonials played softly in the background. Artwork hung everywhere, each piece telling its own powerful tale. In one corner, a poet performed a spoken-word piece inspired by the stories. In another, a musician strummed a guitar, singing a song he'd written about finding courage in the face of injustice. She stood near the entrance, greeting visitors and answering questions. Many attendees thanked her for creating a space where their voices mattered. One man, his eyes glistening with tears, approached her and said, "For years I felt invisible, but tonight I feel seen." His words stayed with her long after he walked away. Despite the success of the event, she couldn't ignore the criticism that followed. Some accused her of stirring up trouble, claiming projects like this only widened the divide between communities and law enforcement. Others dismissed the stories as exaggerations or isolated incidents. At times, the backlash felt overwhelming, threatening to overshadow the progress she'd made. But instead of letting it discourage her, she used it as fuel to push harder. Her next move was bold. She organized a meeting between community members and police officials. The idea was risky. Both sides had strong feelings and tensions were high, but she believed dialogue was key to bridging the gap. With the help of mediators, she arranged for a neutral location where everyone could come together to talk openly. On the day of the meeting, nerves crackled in the air. Community members sat on one side of the room while officers occupied the other. Chairs creaked as people shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to expect. When she stepped up to speak, she felt every eye in the room on her. Taking a deep breath, she said, "This isn't about pointing fingers or placing blame. It's about understanding each other. We all want the same thing, a safe, fair community, but we're failing to get there because we're not listening." Her words set the tone for the discussion. Slowly, hesitantly, people began sharing their perspectives. A mother talked about teaching her teenage son how to act around police to avoid getting hurt. An officer admitted feeling stuck between enforcing laws and earning trust. Tears flowed freely as walls started to crumble. By the end of the session, though disagreements remained, there was a glimmer of mutual respect, a fragile but important first step toward healing. Afterward, exhausted but hopeful, she reflected on how far she'd come since that fateful night. What started as a personal tragedy had grown into a movement bigger than herself. She wasn't naive enough to think everything would change overnight, but she saw signs of progress. More officers were attending training sessions on cultural sensitivity. Local leaders were drafting policies aimed at increasing transparency. And most importantly, people were talking, really talking, about the issues that divided them. Still, some days felt heavier than others. Late one evening, as she painted alone in her room, frustration bubbled over. No matter how many events she organized or petitions she launched, the system seemed stubbornly resistant to meaningful change. Was she making any real difference, or was she just spinning her wheels? Her dad found her sitting on the floor surrounded by half-finished canvases, brushes scattered around her. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside her and waited. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you ever feel like nothing changes?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But remember this, even the biggest storms start with a single drop of rain. You're that drop. Keep falling, keep pushing, and eventually, you'll make waves." His words comforted her, reminding her of why she started this journey in the first place. Change wasn't linear. It zigzagged, stumbled, and sometimes stalled completely. But giving up wasn't an option, not when so many people were counting on her. The next morning, she woke up determined to keep moving forward. She picked up her phone and sent a message to a friend involved in advocacy work. "Let's plan our next move," she typed. As she hit send, she smiled faintly. The road ahead was long, but she was ready to walk it, one step at a time. The next few months were a blur of action and reflection. She poured herself into planning new initiatives, organizing events, and amplifying voices that had long been ignored. But despite her relentless drive, moments of doubt still crept in. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the world outside seemed to pause, she'd sit by her window staring at the stars, wondering if any of this truly mattered. Was she making a dent in the system, or was she just shouting into the void? Her mom often found her like this, lost in thought. One evening, as she sat sketching absent-mindedly on a notepad, her mom brought her a cup of tea and sat beside her. "You've been working so hard," her mom said gently. "But are you taking care of yourself too?" She shrugged, dipping her pen back into the inkwell. "I don't know how to stop, Mom. There's always more to do. Every time I think we're getting somewhere, something happens that reminds me how far we still have to go." Her mom placed a hand over hers, stopping her restless scribbling. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed. You're carrying a lot on your shoulders. Just remember, you're not alone in this. Let people help you." Those words stuck with her. For so long, she'd tried to shoulder everything herself, afraid that leaning on others might make her seem weak or incapable. But maybe her mom was right. Maybe it was time to let others share the load. The following week, she reached out to some of the people who had supported her from the beginning. Friends, activists, mentors, and even strangers who had offered their help along the way. Together, they formed a small but dedicated team focused on tackling systemic issues within the community. They called themselves the Ripple Collective, a nod to the idea that small actions could create big changes. Their first project was ambitious, creating a community oversight board to monitor police conduct. The concept wasn't new. It had been discussed for years, but no one had managed to make it happen. Determined to change that, the group spent weeks researching similar programs in other cities, drafting proposals, and meeting with local officials. It wasn't easy. Many bureaucrats dismissed them as idealistic dreamers, while others outright opposed the idea, fearing it would undermine law enforcement authority. But the collective refused to give up. They gathered signatures, held town halls, and rallied support from influential figures in the community. Slowly but surely, their persistence paid off. A city council member agreed to sponsor the proposal, bringing it before the full council for a vote. On the day of the hearing, dozens of supporters packed the room, holding signs and cheering loudly when the measure passed by a narrow margin. It wasn't a perfect solution. The board would need funding and cooperation from the police department to function effectively, but it was a start. As she stood outside the building afterward, hugging teammates and celebrating the win, she felt a surge of pride. This victory belonged to all of them, not just her. Still, challenges remained. Not everyone welcomed the oversight board with open arms. Some officers grumbled about being watched and questioned the qualifications of those appointed to serve on the board. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. To address these concerns, she worked with mediators to organize training sessions aimed at fostering mutual understanding between the board members and the police force. Progress was slow, and trust didn't come easily, but the effort planted seeds of collaboration. Meanwhile, her art continued to play a central role in her activism. She collaborated with local schools to teach kids how to express their feelings through painting and drawing. Together, they created murals around the city that celebrated diversity, resilience, and unity. One mural, painted on the side of a community center, featured hands of different colors reaching toward the sky, a symbol of hope and connection. Passers-by often stopped to admire it, snapping photos and leaving notes of gratitude taped to the wall. Her work caught the attention of a national nonprofit focused on criminal justice reform. They invited her to speak at a conference in another state, where activists, policymakers, and academics gathered to discuss solutions to systemic inequality. At first, she hesitated. Traveling meant stepping away from her projects at home, and public speaking still made her nervous. But after much deliberation, and plenty of encouragement from her team, she accepted the invitation. The conference was unlike anything she'd experienced before. Hundreds of attendees filled the auditorium, representing communities from across the country. Panels covered topics ranging from bail reform to mental health resources for underserved populations. When her turn came to speak, she stepped onto the stage, heart pounding in her chest. Looking out at the sea of faces, she reminded herself why she was there, to share her story and inspire others to take action. "I didn't choose this path," she began, gripping the edges of the podium. "It chose me. And while I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anyone, I'm grateful for the lessons it taught me. It showed me the power of speaking up, even when you're scared. It showed me the importance of standing together, even when the odds feel impossible." By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. People lined up afterward to thank her, exchange contact information, and share ideas. For the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful, not just for her own community, but for communities everywhere. Back home, she threw herself into implementing the insights she'd gained at the conference. With input from her team, she launched a mentorship program connecting young people with leaders in various fields, including law enforcement. The goal was to break down stereotypes and build bridges between generations. Initially met with skepticism, the program quickly gained traction, thanks to its focus on open dialogue and shared experiences. Despite these successes, Setbacks continued to test her resolve. Funding for the Ripple Collective dried up unexpectedly, forcing them to scale back some of their projects. Critics accused her of losing momentum, claiming she was spreading herself too thin. Even her own exhaustion sometimes threatened to overwhelm her. But each time she wavered, she reminded herself of the faces she'd seen during her journey. The mother who feared for her son's safety, the officer who wanted to do better, the child who dreamed of a brighter future. Their stories kept her grounded, reminding her why she couldn't afford to quit. One rainy afternoon, as she walked through the park near her house, she noticed something unexpected. A group of teenagers had gathered under a pavilion, spray painting a mural on the concrete walls. Curious, she approached them and saw that they were recreating one of her designs, the image of hands reaching skyward. When they noticed her watching, they grinned sheepishly. "We saw your mural downtown," one of them explained. "We liked it so much we decided to make our own version." Tears pricked her eyes as she thanked them. In that moment, she realized her impact extended beyond policy changes and protests. Her message was resonating with people in ways she hadn't anticipated. Art, she thought, truly did have the power to heal and unite. As she headed home, raindrops, tapping lightly on her umbrella, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she no longer doubted her ability to navigate it. Change might be slow, messy, and imperfect, but it was happening, and she was part of it. Years passed and the city began to feel different. The changes weren't dramatic or flashy. There was no grand announcement declaring victory over injustice, but they were there if you looked closely enough. Police officers started wearing body cameras as standard practice, and footage was reviewed regularly by the oversight board she had helped create. Training programs now included lessons on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation tactics, with role-playing exercises designed to simulate real-world scenarios. Neighborhood meetings became more common, offering residents a chance to voice concerns directly to law enforcement leaders. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild. For her, life settled into a rhythm of purpose and balance. She still worked at the cafe, serving customers with the same warmth and kindness that had always defined her. But in her free time, she continued painting, teaching, and advocating for change. Her art evolved too, reflecting not just pain and struggle, but also hope and resilience. Galleries began reaching out, asking to feature her work in exhibitions focused on social justice. At first, she hesitated. She didn't want to be seen as capitalizing on tragedy, but eventually she agreed. If her paintings could spark conversations and inspire others, then sharing them felt like the right thing to do. One day, she received an invitation to speak at a national event celebrating grassroots activism. The theme was Everyday Heroes, and she was listed alongside teachers, healthcare workers, and environmental advocates who had made extraordinary impacts in their communities. When she arrived at the venue, nerves fluttered in her stomach. The room buzzed with energy, filled with people eager to learn from one another. As she waited backstage, listening to other speakers share their stories, she realized something profound. She wasn't alone. There were countless others fighting similar battles in different corners of the world. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. Adjusting the microphone, she smiled at the crowd before beginning. "I used to think heroes wore capes or did big, bold things that changed the course of history," she said. "But I've learned that heroism isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard. It's about believing in something bigger than yourself and refusing to give up." She went on to recount her journey, from the night she was attacked to the moment she decided to speak out. She spoke about the challenges she faced, the criticism, the setbacks, the moments of doubt, and how each one taught her something valuable. She talked about the importance of community, emphasizing that none of what she achieved would have been possible without the support of others. By the time she finished, many in the audience were wiping away tears. Afterward, people lined up to meet her, shaking her hand and thanking her for her courage. One woman hugged her tightly, whispering, You've inspired me to start my own project back home. Another man handed her a business card saying, "Let's collaborate. I think our missions align." Each interaction reminded her why she kept pushing forward, even on the hardest days. Back in her hometown, the mural she'd painted years ago, the one with hands reaching toward the sky, had become a local landmark. Tourists stopped to take photos and school groups visited to hear its story. What surprised her most, though, was seeing how it had inspired others to create their own murals around the city. Vibrant artwork now adorned walls that were once bare, transforming dull spaces into vibrant expressions of hope and unity. Her mentorship program flourished, connecting hundreds of young people with mentors who believed in their potential. Some participants went on to pursue careers in law enforcement, determined to make a difference from within the system. Others became activists, educators, or artists, using their talents to uplift their communities. Watching them grow gave her a sense of fulfillment she hadn't expected. Yet despite all the progress, she knew the fight wasn't over. Systemic issues couldn't be solved overnight, and new challenges constantly arose. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, she embraced the uncertainty. Change, she realized, wasn't a destination. It was a continuous process. And as long as she stayed committed to moving forward, she could handle whatever came next. On a quiet evening, she stood in her backyard watching the sunset paint the horizon in shades of orange and pink. Her mom joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You've come so far," her mom said softly, handing her a cup. "Do you ever stop to think about how much you've accomplished?" She sipped her tea, gazing at the sky. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I try not to focus too much on the past. There's still so much to do." Her mom chuckled. "That's my girl. Always looking ahead." And she was. While she took pride in what she'd achieved, her mind was already buzzing with ideas for the future. She dreamed of expanding the Ripple Collective to other cities, creating networks of activists working together to tackle systemic inequality on a larger scale. She envisioned partnerships with schools, businesses, and organizations to promote education and understanding. Most importantly, she hoped to inspire others to believe in their power to create change. As darkness fell and stars began to twinkle, above she felt a deep sense of gratitude for her family, her friends, her community, and everyone who had supported her along the way. Life hadn't turned out the way she'd imagined when she was younger, but maybe that was a good thing. Maybe the twists and turns had led her exactly where she was meant to be. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and that was okay. For the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. After all, she had proven something important, not just to the world but to herself. Even in the face of fear, anger, and injustice, one person's voice could ignite a movement. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything.